When I was 21 years old, I worked in the maintenance and custodial position at a daycare down the block from my apartment. It was a demanding job, especially because it was just me and one older guy, Bob, who was technically my boss, though most of the time, I was the one doing all the heavy lifting. My responsibilities included tasks like disposing of trash, moving and setting up furniture for special events, performing preventative maintenance, keeping supplies organized, maintaining and cleaning the facility, and most importantly, ensuring a safe environment for the children, which included reporting any suspicious activity that could lead to child abuse or mistreatment. Some days, I was the one to open and close the facility. It was a quiet, uneventful job most of the time, but there was one Friday that would change everything. It was right after Thanksgiving, and the daycare was about to begin the transition from the autumn decorations to the Christmas ones. The kids were long gone, and the building was silent, save for the hum of the lights and the occasional creak of the floors. That Friday, Bob told me he would be leaving early, like he did every Friday. His instructions were simple: clean up the classrooms, pack away the Thanksgiving decorations, take them down to the basement, and start bringing up the Christmas crates. It was a mundane task, and I was ready to get it over with. The daycare was situated on the grounds of a Catholic school and church, though I knew the daycare was open to children of all faiths. I had worked there long enough to get used to the routine. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, I locked all the doors and got to work. I started by carrying the Thanksgiving crates downstairs. The basement was cold and dimly lit, with a single flickering bulb hanging above the stairs. The place always gave me the chills, mostly because it felt so neglected, like it had been left behind by time. The basement wasn't just a storage area. It felt like a forgotten part of the building where things went to die. The smell of mildew was strong, and the lighting was poor, just some small, weak lights tucked in the corners that barely illuminated the space. The ceiling was low, and I had to crouch a little to avoid hitting my head. As I made my way down with the crates, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I had worked in that basement countless times before, but tonight something was different. The silence was oppressive, and the darkness seemed to be pressing in on me. I dropped the Thanksgiving crates in the usual spot near the front of the basement, just to get them out of the way. I didn't care enough to take them all the way to the back. I was looking forward to finishing and heading home for the weekend. But as I lugged one of the Christmas crates up the stairs, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A child's laugh. It was faint, muffled, but unmistakable. I froze, staring at the empty hall. It was just me in the building. The last of the staff had left hours ago. I heard the laugh again, this time slightly louder. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere inside the building. I quickly checked the classrooms, the art room, the play area, and even the bathrooms. No one was there. No kids, no staff. Just silence. Then I thought of the basement. I walked slowly back to the basement door, my heart pounding in my chest. The laugh continued in the distance, almost like it was mocking me. I opened the door, and I swear I heard something scurrying down below. I shouted, "Who's down there?" But there was no answer. I stood at the top of the stairs, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. It was as if something, or someone, was waiting for me in the dark. My flashlight flickered as I stepped down the stairs, calling out, Is anyone down here? I could hear my voice echoing off the stone walls, but there was no response. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the toy cars, which had been neatly lined up against the wall, was moving by itself. I stood there, frozen, as the car rolled for a split second before coming to a sudden halt. My first instinct was to check the storage room. I rushed through the hallway to the end, where the door to the room stood slightly ajar. Inside, the dim light revealed a chaotic mess of boxes, crates, and forgotten equipment. I scanned the room with my flashlight, my eyes darting around the shadows, but there was no one there. Is anyone down here? I called again, my voice shaking now. Silence. Dead silence. A few weeks after I quit the daycare job, I thought I had put the strange events behind me. I moved on, finding a new job at a construction company, and life seemed to go back to normal. But that wasn't the end of it. It was a late night, and I had just finished a long shift and a quick session at the gym. I was exhausted, and the last thing I wanted to do was cook dinner, so I grabbed some Chipotle on my way home. When I got back to my apartment, I plopped down on the couch, completely drained. I had just finished eating when I must have dozed off. The TV was still on, but the low hum of the sound seemed distant, muffled. The exhaustion that had taken over my body was almost impossible to fight. I let the comfort of the couch embrace me, and before I knew it, I was asleep. I woke up a few hours later, the apartment eerily quiet. My phone read 11 p.m. My body felt stiff, and my eyes burned from the lack of sleep. I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer, so I dragged myself to the bathroom to remove my contacts. That's when it happened again. I heard my name, a faint whisper, like a soft breeze in the room, but distinctly human. A woman's voice. I froze. I couldn't even process what I was hearing at first. It was a familiar voice, one that I couldn't quite place, but it was unmistakably there. James. I turned around slowly, but there was no one in the room. My heart skipped a beat, and I rushed to the living room, scanning the empty space. I turned on the lights, hoping to clear the confusion, but the room seemed blurry, and the shadows stretched unnaturally long. Mom? I called out, half expecting it to be a dream, but there was no answer. I grabbed my glasses from my nightstand and went back into the living room, scanning the space with clearer eyes. Nothing. No one. But the air was thick with a strange heaviness, and my pulse raced. I called my mom just to confirm she hadn't come by. Her groggy voice answered, waking her up from sleep. No, I'm not there, she said, her voice laced with confusion. I shrugged it off, attributing it to fatigue. I'd been working nonstop lately. Surely it was just a hallucination. I tried to convince myself of that as I went back to bed. But as I lay there, drifting back into the haze of half-sleep, I heard it again. My name. Again, in that same voice. This time, it was clearer, more distinct. It came from inside my bedroom. I froze, my body rigid as the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I slowly turned over to look toward the far end of the room. The air felt heavier, colder, and then I saw it. A tall, dark figure stood just a few feet away from the bed, the silhouette of a woman, long hair, disheveled, hanging down in front of her face. Her form was strangely distorted, as if her features were warped, her body unnaturally elongated. I couldn't move. The figure didn't move either, but I could feel her presence, like she was watching me, waiting for me to react. The longer I stared, the the more unsettling it became. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch around her, like she was pulling them toward her. My breath hitched in my chest, and I fumbled around, desperate to find the light switch. My fingers brushed against the nightstand, knocking over a lamp. With trembling hands, I flicked the switch. The room flooded with light. There was nothing there. My heart hammered in my chest as I sat up, searching the room with frantic eyes. I ripped the blankets off and ran to every corner of the room. I checked under the bed, opened every closet door, and even glanced behind the curtains, but there was nothing. I sank back onto the bed, my mind racing. Was it a hallucination? Could it have been sleep paralysis? I didn't know, but it felt so real, too real to ignore. Shaking, I lay back down, trying to convince myself it was all just my mind playing tricks. I tried to close my eyes, but the unease kept me wide awake. I was hyper-aware of every creak in the walls, every shift in the air. As I lay there in the dark, it happened again. This time, the whisper was right in my ear. "Come closer." I jumped out of bed, my heart in my throat. The room felt like it was closing in on me, suffocating me with its darkness. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't even trust the room anymore. I bolted out of my bedroom, my legs shaking, and went to my brother's room. He wasn't there, and I didn't care. I was too panicked to think. I paced around the living room for hours, waiting for some sign of it to stop, but it never did. The house felt wrong. Every corner, every room was full of a heavy, unnatural presence that made me feel like I was being watched. The next few days passed in a blur. I tried to return to my normal routine, but something inside me had broken. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lingering. One evening, while I was sitting in the living room watching TV, a loud, sudden crash came from the kitchen. I froze. It was the same blue plastic cup that had fallen a week ago, the one I had put back on the counter. I hadn't touched it since. I rushed into the kitchen, but there was no one there. I set the cup back on the counter, thinking it had just fallen on its own. But that wasn't the only strange thing that happened that night. I heard a sound coming from above me, a creak, a soft footstep. The ceiling above me was my brother's bedroom, but I knew he wasn't home. It was just me. I went upstairs to check, but there was nothing there. My room was the same as I left it. I chalked it up to nerves and tried to shake off the tension, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it again. A tap. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone was knocking on the window. My heart dropped. I knew there was no one outside. I was on the second floor. I got up, walked over to the window, and lifted the blinds. Nothing. But the tapping continued. It was coming from inside the room. I spun around, searching the dark corners, but there was no one there. I ran to my brother's room again, knocking frantically on the door. He opened it, looking groggy and confused. "Did you hear that?" I gasped, my voice trembling. He didn't answer right away. "What are you talking about?" "I swear someone is here." My voice was almost pleading now. But he just shrugged, dismissing me as if I was overreacting. But I wasn't imagining things. The tapping continued that night, and the next night. I never felt truly safe in that house again. It felt as though something was lurking, just beyond my vision. I was afraid to close my eyes, and that was just the beginning. The nights began to feel like an endless cycle of dread, each one blending into the next as the presence grew stronger. It was as if the house was alive with its own dark energy, something malevolent that had taken root, and it was not going to let me go. A week passed after the tapping incident. My brother James had tried to reassure me that it was nothing more than the house settling, or perhaps the wind outside causing strange sounds. But I knew better. The sounds weren't normal. They were deliberate, as if something or someone was trying to make its presence known. I was afraid to be alone, and every time I tried to fall asleep, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. It was an uncomfortable feeling, a weight that pressed down on my chest. I found myself staying up late, staring at the walls of my bedroom, afraid that if I closed my eyes, I would see the shadow of that tall figure again. I kept the lights on all the time now, hoping that the light would keep the darkness at bay. Then, on one particularly stormy night, something far worse happened. I had just come home from a late shift at work, and the storm outside was fierce. The wind howled, and the rain battered against the windows. The power had gone out earlier, but the backup lights were still on. I dropped my bags at the door and tried to shake off the unease that always accompanied these late hours. I needed to relax, so I started to make myself dinner, trying to distract myself from the creeping feeling of something wrong. As I was preparing food, I heard the distinct sound of a door creaking open. At first, I thought it was just the house settling again, but then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway. I froze. The footsteps weren't like the ones I had heard before. They were heavier, like someone was walking in boots, each step echoing in the silence of the house. I slowly walked toward the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned the corner and saw nothing. The hallway was empty. The door to my brother's room was wide open, but there was no sign of him. He wasn't home. I'd checked earlier. The silence was deafening. My mind raced, and I couldn't stop myself from walking into the room. It was pitch dark inside, except for the dim light filtering in from the kitchen. I stepped inside, calling out, "James?" No answer. I stepped further into the room. It felt wrong. The air was thick with something I couldn't explain. And then, just as I turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, panic rising in my throat. The door refused to open. I shoved at it, but it was locked from the inside. I screamed for help, but no one was there to hear me. Suddenly, I heard that whisper again, soft and low, coming from the corner of the room. "Come closer." I backed away, my eyes searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. The room was empty. Yet the whisper continued, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply, making my breath visible in the air. Then I saw it. From the corner of the room, where the shadows seemed to gather, something moved. It was slow at first, a small shift in the darkness, but as it moved closer, it became more distinct. A humanoid shape, tall and thin, its features obscured by the shadows. The figure took one step, then another, until it was standing right in front of me. I could feel the coldness emanating from it, like the darkness itself had taken form. I couldn't scream. My throat felt tight, like I was being choked by the air itself. And then, in the space of a second, the figure lunged. I staggered back, my heart hammering, and the door, almost as if it had been waiting for the right moment, opened with a loud crash. I didn't hesitate. I bolted out of the room, running through the house with no particular destination in mind. All I wanted was to escape, to get out, but I had nowhere to go. The house had become a prison, and whatever was inside, it was playing with me. I ran to the front door, but before I could reach it, the power flickered back on. The lights in the house flickered briefly before becoming stable. The house felt alive. I looked around, half expecting to see something standing there, waiting for me. But there was nothing. Only the oppressive silence. I didn't stay another minute. I grabbed my keys and ran out into the storm, not looking back as I drove to the nearest hotel. I didn't care about the rain or the wind anymore. All I could think about was getting as far away from that house as possible. For the next few days, I stayed in the hotel. But the nightmares followed me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure, that shadow, that whisper. It was always there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for me to return. And I knew, deep down, that it was only a matter of time before it came for me again. I spent the next week trying to recover, staying away from the house, from the place where it all started. I even started sleeping with the lights on in the hotel, refusing to let the shadows creep into my room. But despite my best efforts, the nightmares returned, stronger than ever. They weren't just dreams anymore. They were memories, blurry and indistinct. But I knew they were real. I could hear the whispering, the tapping, the strange presence. It was as if it was waiting for me to give in, to let myself believe it was real. One morning, I decided to return home. I had to. I couldn't keep running forever. But as I pulled up to the house, I felt a cold dread settle in my chest. It wasn't just fear. It was something darker. Something inside me knew that I had to confront whatever was haunting this place, or it would consume me. I stepped inside, the door creaking as I pushed it open. The house felt different now, quieter, heavier. The walls seemed to pulse with some unseen energy. It was as if the house had taken on a life of its own. I walked through the empty rooms, half expecting something to jump out at me, but the place was still. Too still. I made my way to the basement. I don't know why I went there. Maybe I thought that if I could face whatever was in that basement, I could finally end it. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy, that it was all real. But as I stood at the top of the stairs, I could feel the air shift around me. The familiar sense of dread wrapped itself around me like a suffocating blanket. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer, my hands shaking as I descended the stairs. The basement was colder than I remembered. The shadows seemed to move of their own accord, flickering in the dim light from the small corner lamps. The boxes I had left behind were still there, piled haphazardly. And then I saw it, the door to the storage room, slightly ajar, like it was inviting me in. I hesitated at first. Something deep inside me told me to turn back, to leave and never look back, but I couldn't. I had to know. I walked toward the door. Each step felt like it took an eternity. As I reached for the handle, I heard something. A faint, muffled laugh. It wasn't from the walls, the floor, or the shadows. It was from behind the door. I opened it. The room was darker than I remembered. The air was thick with dust, and the stale smell of old boxes filled my nostrils. I flashed the light around, my heart pounding in my chest. There, in the far corner of the room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a child's toy, a small plastic car, moving on its own. I backed away, my mind racing. There was no wind down here, no air currents. It was impossible for the car to be moving on its own. And then I saw it, a shadow in the corner, moving toward me, stretching unnaturally long. The figure was tall, too tall. Its limbs were distorted, its features obscured by darkness. But I could make out the shape of a face, the face of something or someone watching me. The whisper came again. This time, it was clear. "Come closer." My heart hammered in my chest as I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I could feel the presence closing in on me, the shadows reaching for me like fingers. I stumbled up the stairs, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. I slammed the door shut behind me and ran out of the house, not stopping until I reached my car. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to escape. As I drove, I could feel the weight of the house still pressing on my chest. I thought I'd left it behind, but it wasn't done with me. It never would be. I'm writing this now, in a hotel room, far from that house, but I can still hear it. The whispers, the tapping, the soft, muffled laughter. I know it's waiting for me, somewhere out there, and I'm not sure I can outrun it anymore. I think I've learned that some things, some places, are never truly gone. I stood still, trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was no way a kid could have moved that car. I began to check the containers and boxes for any signs of movement, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That's when I heard it. A faint plastic sound, as if something had dropped to the floor. Without thinking, I turned and ran back to the stairs, heart racing. My breath came in short gasps as I scrambled up, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty basement. Just as I reached the top, I heard a whisper, soft and chilling, as though it was right behind me. "Come back." I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it with trembling hands. My mind was spinning. I didn't know what I had just heard or what I had just seen, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel real. I called Bob immediately, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened. He told me to call the police if I thought there was a child down there. But the truth was, I wasn't sure if there had been a child at all. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. The only thing I knew was that I couldn't go back down there without finding out for sure. The police arrived, their footsteps heavy on the floor as they checked the basement. We went down together, the beam of my flashlight shaking as I led the way. We inspected every corner of the room, but there was nothing, just boxes and crates, nothing out of place. There were no signs of a child, no traces of anything that could explain what I had heard. But then I remembered the plastic sound. I looked around the floor for anything that could have made that noise, but there was nothing. No objects out of place, no debris. It was as if it had all been a trick of the mind, or worse, a trick of the house. The police officers left after confirming there was nothing to report. I could tell they were frustrated by the wasted call, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to stay in that building another minute. I quit my job before Christmas, and I never had to go back down to that basement again.